Hey, welcome back to the stash. Everyone, I swear to God, this is not a drill. Mary Jane Watson has finally after all this time, broken up with Paul. And I can stop using this stupid meme every time I say the name Paul. Paul? I don't even know where to start or how to begin. Paul Rabin has got to be one of the worst, one of the most insulting, and one of the most pointless characters modern Marvel has ever tried to force us to like. His entire, and I mean entire, point of existence was to keep MJ and Peter separated after Nick Spencer tried his absolute hardest to fix their relationship. The worst part is that things back then were looking on the up. They were very serious as a couple once more. Peter had regained his lost character growth, and him and MJ were seemingly going to move in together. Fast forward to yet another relaunch by Marvel, and the Amazing Spider-Man issue 1 is released to the world, and all of a sudden, things look beyond bleak again. He had no friends, Aunt May was sick of him, and worst of all, him and MJ were broken up. Now, the big marketing for the volume's first overarching story was the simple question of, what did Peter do? And after they dragged out that story for a solid 25 issues, the answer was an astounding nothing. He didn't do anything. He simply tried his hardest to save the love of his life, who for some reason was now written completely out of character once again. Not to mention that during all of this, the big bad Paul's dad would frequently call MJ the Scarlet Woman. Nick Flowen said, "Wells, we know what you are." Anyway, through it all, it seemed Marvel was really going to try to make Paul and Mary Jane stick as a couple, making us suffer through a couple of years more of absolute pain and misery. To make it worse, they were so desperate for Mary Jane to be interesting again without actually writing her like Mary Jane. So they just retread yet another brand new day storyline and made her jackpot. This time, for real. The story was, of course, stupid, and the reception for it was astoundingly low. It was so low that they didn't even dare give her her own title. They tried something with Black Cat, but even that failed miserably, and I can even still find copies of the issues untouched in comic stores today. It was a pointless change, yet another to add to the long list for MJ, and no matter how loud the backlash was, the man who aided genocide was still front and center with Mary Jane, all the while Peter was just getting constantly belittled and insulted throughout his entire comic series. They even tried to make it so Peter was friends with them, which is just kind of really sad. But anyway, Mary Jane recently has kind of disappeared from the Amazing Spider-Man comics. She actually just finally appeared in the new volume for the very first time in issue 8, but I'll get back to that soon. Before that though, she got relegated to a different title just like she did years ago with Iron Man. This time it was All New Venom, a series that posed the mysterious question of, who exactly is the All New Venom? As I recall, originally they framed it to be several suspects like Robbie Robertson, Rick Jones, Madam Mask, and Luke Cage. But of course, they didn't go with any of them. During it all, Mary Jane Watson and Paul played a minor role in the series, with them taking care of Dylan Brock, Eddie Brock's son. The best part of this was just how Dylan would constantly insult Paul, but anyway, it was revealed finally that Mary Jane was in fact the new Venom. Now, in my opinion, I think that is a pretty stupid choice, but just like Paul, we all had to endure it anyway. But tensions were rising, Paul was getting bitter and honestly really mean. I even touched on this issue way back when on my How Marvel Can Save Mary Jane video, in which I used the example of Paul treating Dylan like absolute shit as a story opportunity for him to eventually mirror MJ's abusive father. And when she eventually realizes what's happening, it could have been used as a wake-up call for her to eventually leave. And honestly, I feel that theory wasn't that bad at all. In fact, Paul seemingly was getting worse as the series progressed, and it does help when the creators behind the comic also too hate Paul. Anyway, from there, it got leaked that in one of the latest ASM issues, Mary Jane Watson is deeply missing Peter Parker, who's currently having the fight of his life. I was naturally skeptical, but I thought, why not, and allowed myself to feel excited again. And for today, I am so happy to say that a part of the new issue for the Amazing Spider-Man just coming up got leaked. One depicting Mary Jane Watson breaking up with Paul.
Everybody stay calm! What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure? Stay calm!
And thank God, man, because honestly, we have waited way too long for this freak to be booted off the series. But with this change now comes a few things, a few possible outcomes, and I'm kind of worried the odds aren't actually stacked in our favor. Now, for option 1, Mary Jane could easily just take some time for herself after breaking up with Paul, considering they were in a pretty, long-term relationship. It might also do her some good to sort of re-find herself after just being written out of character for so many years now. I'm just kind of worried Marvel will handle it in a way that's just kind of a waste of time. But for option 2, MJ could want to go back with Peter, but Marvel being Marvel would send him off into space for some cosmic adventure, or even have her talk to Ben Reilly instead of Peter and get the two mixed up through like one of the most forced dramas possible. It is Marvel, and I feel like after reading so many comics from this company, the one thing that seems to be the standard for how they handle relationships is how they just somehow always force the most baffling relationship drama. I mean, it's been like this since the 60s, and it wouldn't surprise me if they do some sort of bullshit again just to keep them separated for longer. And a part of this theory would rely on the other theory that Ben Reilly will be Earth's Spider-Man for a while as Peter's in space, and with Mary Jane breaking up with Paul, I went from wanting that to be the scenario of Peter in space, Ben Reilly on Earth, but now I kind of want the opposite. Like, we waited so long for this to happen, and then for Marvel just to send Peter up into space just kind of feels like another insult to us. For option 3 though, this thought scares me. For this one, I believe they might even have Peter choose Shay over MJ. This would be entirely out of character. I mean, he'd have to get more serious with her again, instead of flirting with Felicia for the billionth time. But for the last 20 years, these characters have been written wrong, so who knows? He might even choose Felicia instead at this point, I have no clue. And lastly, for option 4, and my personal favorite, Marvel stops being stubborn pricks and finally allows them to date again. Now with this though, there needs to be some heavy damage control, because although she finally left Paul, it doesn't really make all the shit we had to endure magically go away. And I hope Marvel would actually take the time to focus on some real character development again, instead of just simply flanderizing everyone while feeding us meaningless action. But you know what's like the funniest thing about this all? I didn't even know how bad it had gotten until this panel hit me. Like, I knew I was angry, I knew I was tired, but it wasn't until I saw her say it, like, saw her finally cut the cord and finally walk away from this joke of a relationship, that it hit me just how long we've been holding on to nothing. We've been begging, pleading, screaming into the void while Marvel acted like we were the crazy ones, like we were the problems for not buying into this forced drama. But no, this moment proves what we've all known deep down. They knew. They all knew. They knew Paul was never going to land. They knew we hated it. They knew the backlash wasn't just noise, it was the truth, and they dragged it out anyway. I can't tell you how many times I almost gave up, how many times I looked at this run and just thought, what even is the point? Whether some of you were buying the books or others simply just biding their time, we waited because I believe that we believed that maybe somehow they'd finally listen, and now, in a way, they kinda did. I'm not saying everything's fixed, far from it, but the first domino has fallen. It's a small win, and if we don't take them, then I doubt we'll ever truly be happy through the dark eras of the comics. To me, it's such a sweet, long overdue feeling. This isn't just about Paul, it's about what he represented. This cheap, manufactured wedge between Peter and MJ, this lazy attempt at shaking the status quo without any of the work. Paul was the ultimate symbol of Marvel not respecting their own characters, or even us. I know some people will say we're overreacting, but I don't think that's true. Not after undoing years of bringing them back together. Not after the fake kids. Not after Jackpot. Not after all those little gaslighting moments where they try to convince us MJ was somehow better off without Peter. That she was happier now, or that Paul was good for her. What part of any of this has been healthy? What part of Paul getting angry at Dylan, or even Mary Jane for simply needing the symbiote to live, or hell, aiding genocide was meant to be right? We knew it was wrong, and now we're just finally seeing the comic admit it too. This is the first time in years I feel like Marvel isn't actively trying to punish us with the Amazing Spider-Man. I just still really hope we can get back to the days of Peter and MJ choosing each other, over and over again in a world that never made it easy. That's what made them special, that's what made them real, and it's what Paul could never replicate, no matter how many fake kids they gave him. I just hope Marvel doesn't mess this up. It's so simple and so unbelievably easy to make the Amazing Spider-Man feel amazing again. And once more, they have a real chance of recapturing that feeling. I just hope, for our sakes, Marvel finally gives us what we want. But as for Paul, I mean, hey, I hear Big Lucky needs a new cellmate. Spider-Man, Spider-Man.